Hey guys, welcome on into today's video. If you're interested in getting more political forecasting, analysis, and commentary, you can click that subscribe button. Heading into this one, going to be doing a hypothetical 2020 presidential election between Bernie Sanders and Mike Pence. Of course, this is just a hypothetical, but definitely something that's not out of the realm of possibility. When you look at Bernie Sanders, if he decides he wants to run in the 2020 Democratic primary, he'd have a really good shot at winning that nomination. And then on Pence's side, for whatever reason, if Donald Trump ended up getting impeached at some point during his presidency, that would make Vice President Mike Pence the president, and he would probably run as the 2020 Republican nominee in that case. So definitely a possible matchup that we could see in 2020. Now, in terms of the statistics and data that we're going to be looking at, in the upper right-hand corner, we have the 2016 presidential map. The blue states being Hillary Clinton's, the red states being Donald Trump's, and the darker red also being Trump's, but states that flipped over from where they were in the 2012 election between Obama and Romney. So Trump doing a pretty good job of flipping over some of those battleground states in 2016 that the Democrats will try to reclaim in 2020. Now below that, we have the favorable and unfavorable numbers for Mike Pence and Bernie Sanders. We have a lot more data on this on Sanders' side of things, but for Mike Pence, currently negative 7.5 percentage points in terms of his favorable, unfavorable numbers in comparison to Sanders, who continues to poll as one of the most popular, if not the most popular politician in the United States, with his favorability numbers generally being in about the 20 to even as high as 30% range, which is great for him going into a potential 2020 presidential election scenario. Now, we're going to be doling out these states based on the 2016 results and these two candidates' current favorable, unfavorable numbers, and we're going to be giving Sanders the states that we think are pretty safe on his side, Pence the ones that are probably pretty safe on his side, and then we're going to be going through in a little bit more detail on probably what are going to be more so the battleground states. Now, starting out with Bernie Sanders, in terms of how he's going to perform against Pence, we see him likely doing better in every state across the board against Pence in comparison to what Clinton was able to do against Donald Trump. So with that being the case, every state that Clinton was able to win, we're going to be giving at the start of this over to Bernie Sanders. So that would be Hawaii, California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, Minnesota, Illinois, and then the District of Columbia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Virginia, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. So that gets Bernie Sanders up to 233 electoral college votes, which is what Clinton was able to accomplish in 2016. Now, for Mike Pence and the Republicans, I'm going to be giving them safe states, ones that Trump was able to win by a considerable margin, but it's actually a little bit more interesting than that because a lot of these states, you would expect Bernie Sanders to outperform what a traditional Democrat would be able to do. We saw that back during the 2016 primaries and caucuses in a lot of these states where he would blow out nominee Clinton at that point. And we see that carrying over into a matchup like this, but still nonetheless, states that you would expect to go Republican, we're still going to be putting on Mike Pence's side, even though it's probably a little bit more competitive than what you would see, like I said, in an average election. That's going to be Idaho, Alaska, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, South Carolina, Tennessee, and I'm going to leave Kentucky and West Virginia up for debate because Bernie Sanders did pretty well in these states, and there's a lot of crossover potential voters on the Democrat side, especially for a populist like Sanders going against somebody like Mike Pence. So we feel like these are at least worth talking about. And then Indiana, where Mike Pence was the governor, we feel like that would be a pretty safe state for him as well. So you can see the states we have left here are probably more battleground type states in a hypothetical matchup between Sanders and Pence. In a lot of these states, not all of them, but a good amount of them, have voted Democrat in statewide elections or Republican in statewide elections, and were fairly competitive between Clinton and Trump in 2016, or states that we have seen go different directions over the past few election cycles. Now, we're going to work our way out west, moving our way back east. So starting with Arizona, and Clinton actually outperformed what Obama was able to do in Arizona in 2012 and 2008 for her election bid in 2016, losing by just 3.5 percentage points to Donald Trump. And the demographics in the state continue to move more towards a purple direction. And we see Arizona as being pretty much up for grabs at this point for the Democrats going forward, especially in a 2020 election. We've seen the American Southwest continue to become more Democrat. We've seen Nevada become a more consistent blue state, as well as New Mexico and Colorado. Arizona feels like the next state that's probably going to follow in that direction. And just in terms of their favorability numbers, we feel like Sanders would make this really close. And with those demographic shifts in a state like Arizona and some of the population from California moving over to a state like Arizona with those retirees or people that are just looking for relief in terms of lower state taxes, we feel like that also has a benefit to the Democrats' side of things. So we're going to be giving Arizona over to Bernie Sanders in a hypothetical matchup against Mike Pence in what's probably a very close result. Moving on to Texas, and we actually feel like Pence could probably do better in a state like Texas than Donald Trump. Trump, for whatever reason, actually we know the reason, it's because his arguments and not being a big fan of the Bushes definitely hurts him a little bit in the eyes of Texas voters. Pence wouldn't have that issue. He would get the full endorsement of the Bushes and just those establishment Republican voters in a state like Texas. But another one of those southwestern states that's becoming more and more liberal and progressive over the years, especially with their demographic shifting. In 2020, probably somewhat of a close result, but still at the end of the day, we feel like Mike Pence would be able to keep this on the Republicans' side. Moving up to Missouri, a state where Obama lost twice, as well as Clinton losing it by a very significant margin. And it really just kind of depends on who's running on the Democrat ticket, whether they're able to win a statewide election. We've definitely seen in Missouri Democrats be able to win statewide elections. Claire McCaskill, the senator there, for instance, also before their current Republican governor, they had a Democratic governor there in Missouri. Also, we feel like Missouri probably has a little bit of Republican fatigue right now with all the drama that's going on with their current Republican governor. Probably a close race, especially in a state like Missouri. We see a lot of crossover appeal for a candidate like Bernie Sanders, but the fact that the Democrats haven't been able to pick up the state of Missouri over the past 3 election cycles, even maybe with a little bit more establishment candidates, probably Bernie Sanders being a more populist, having a message that's able to reach, especially in some of these Missouri rural areas, probably doing a lot better than Obama or Clinton was able to, and then definitely winning the St. Louis and Kansas City area. Again, a state that we really could make a strong argument probably on either side of things, but just the fact that it has been Republican consistently in these presidential elections, we're still going to give it over to Mike Pence, even though we definitely feel like we could make a case for Sanders to pick up this state. Moving on up to Iowa, and this is where Bernie Sanders started out his 2016 nomination process in that Democratic primary, basically doing a 50-50 with Clinton. That was kind of a surprise because Bernie Sanders, he had almost no name recognition going into that. And Sanders has the kind of populist message that can definitely resonate with Iowa voters. This was a state that Trump was able to flip back over to the Republicans after Obama had won Iowa in 2012 and 2008. We feel like Sanders would be able to get this back on the Democrats' side, so we're going to be giving him Iowa. Now moving into the all-important Midwest area where this election is really decided, and pretty much any election, it seems right now, in a nationwide presidential election between a Republican candidate and a Democrat candidate, you have to do well against these blue-collar Midwestern voters. So Wisconsin, you would feel like a Democrat state by and large, except they have been kind of going against the establishment Democrats more recently. Bernie Sanders did tremendously well there against Hillary Clinton in the primary process in 2016, and that carried on over into the 2016 election where Donald Trump was able to take down Hillary Clinton. Bernie Sanders' message resonates really well with Wisconsin voters, and kind of a carryover here to the state of Michigan as well. We see both of these states flipping back over to the Democrats. And in 2016, if it would have been Bernie Sanders against Donald Trump, we feel like Sanders would have been able to win these very important states as well. And that puts Bernie Sanders over the top, getting him up to 276. You just have to get 270 to pick up the win, but we're going to work our way through the rest of the states here. Ohio, a state that's a bit more conservative than states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania in this Midwestern pocket, maybe slightly more Democratic in general than Indiana, but Mike Pence from Indiana, probably some crossover appeal there, and a state that Republicans were able to flip back to their side in 2016 after Obama had carried the state in 2008 and 2012. We see a very competitive matchup again here between Bernie Sanders and Mike Pence, but just with how this state is generally a bit more conservative, we feel like Mike Pence, especially with his bordering state there of Indiana, probably being able to pick up this state as well. Now, moving out to Pennsylvania, kind of a similar vein to Michigan and Wisconsin. If Bernie Sanders would have ran in 2016, we feel like he would have had a great shot at picking up Pennsylvania, where Trump was able to flip this state after Obama had won it in the 2 prior cycles. But Bernie Sanders' message definitely resonates again with these blue-collar voters over in Pennsylvania. We see him picking up that state. Now, moving into Kentucky and West Virginia, states that you generally see as more conservative, but definitely a lot of voters that are looking for that populist message. That's why Trump did so well, and we feel like that populist message from Sanders could allow him to be competitive against Mike Pence, but still at the end of the day, we feel more comfortable giving these over to Mike Pence and the Republicans. Now, moving on down here, more to the east and southeast, we have North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida as our last 3 states that we're going to talk about. We'll start with Georgia, a state that's been getting closer and closer, and actually Clinton pretty respectable against Donald Trump, losing by about 5 percentage points or so, and another state where we feel like Bernie Sanders could do really well with his blue-collar message and getting a lot of those rural white voters that wouldn't vote for an establishment Democrat, but still a very religious area, and Republicans in general do very well in Georgia in these presidential elections. So even though this is a state that Democrats are working on and making up ground in, and still probably a competitive result, still going to give it over to Mike Pence here. Moving up to North Carolina, another one of those states, kind of similar to Georgia and maybe even Virginia to some extent, where Democrats have been making some inroads and gaining ground. Of course, North Carolina going to Obama in 2008, but then flipping over to Romney in 2012. And then in a very competitive result between Clinton and Trump, Trump able to grab the state of North Carolina. We see, again, a competitive result between Sanders and Pence. And we feel like Bernie Sanders, in terms of his favorability numbers, probably able to get enough of that independent vote and maybe even some crossover Republican vote, where this state that's kind of turning more purple and maybe even a bit more blue down the line in a 2020 election, we see that as going over to Bernie Sanders. Now, talking about Florida, and this is a state where obviously it's pretty much close in any presidential election. It's usually within about 1 or 2 percentage points on either side. Obama was able to pick up Florida twice in both in 2008 and 2012, and then of course Trump just flipping it back over to the Republicans, winning by about 1 percentage point or so. And not a surprise, see this as being another very competitive result between Bernie Sanders and Mike Pence. And based on the fact that Bernie Sanders didn't perform overly well in the 2016 primary against Hillary Clinton, a lot of older voters here, a lot more establishment type voters, it does seem in general. We feel like Mike Pence would be able to carve out enough here where he'd probably be able to win a state like Florida as well. And we're putting a lot of that on the 2016 primary result, where Bernie Sanders did not have the kind of numbers that you'd like to see. So that's going to be our final tally here in a hypothetical matchup between Bernie Sanders and Mike Pence, with Bernie Sanders getting 311 Electoral College, Pence getting 227. Now, maybe we're being a little bit too generous to Mike Pence in this scenario, because when you look at those favorability numbers, Bernie Sanders about 30 percentage points or better in that gap between favorable and unfavorable in comparison to Pence. So he might even outperform in a lot of these states, maybe even able to flip a lot of these Great Plains states where Sanders has a lot of support, maybe a state like Missouri, Ohio, maybe the coal states like Kentucky, West Virginia. Maybe he's able to make more inroads than you might even think otherwise in states like Texas, Georgia. Maybe he's able to flip Florida back over to the Democrats. But even without being able to get any of those states, we still see him getting over the line here at 311 to 227. Again, guys, if you're interested in getting more of these political forecasts and analysis videos, you can click that subscribe button. Check out all of our other videos on our YouTube channel of potential matchups, and we hope to see you guys in our next video. Bye.